When it comes to back training, almost everyone is doing the same dozen or so exercises. But here's the problem: not all back movements are created equal. Some are biomechanical masterpieces that line up perfectly with your anatomy, let you train safely close to failure, and recruit huge amounts of muscle fibers. And some are, well, let's just say they sound better in theory than they actually are in practice. So today, we're going to build a full tier list of the most common back exercises, from D tier all the way to S tier, and figure out which movements actually deserve a spot in your program if your goal is maximal hypertrophy. We'll be looking specifically at the upper traps, mid traps and rhomboids, rear delts, and the lats. By the end of this, you'll know exactly which 4 exercises are the kings of back training, one for each of those muscle groups. Let's start at the bottom of the barrel with D tier. D tier is for movements that sound hardcore, but in practice just aren't good for muscle growth. A classic example here is the behind the neck lat pull down. Sure, it looks impressive, but the biomechanics are a mess. Your shoulder is in external rotation and abduction, which puts your rotator cuff at risk and doesn't even put the lats in their strongest line of pull. Add in the fact that most people cheat form or can't load it properly, and you've got an exercise that's more orthopedic liability than hypertrophy tool. Another D tier offender is the upright row for traps. While it can hit the upper traps, it's basically a shoulder impingement waiting to happen for a lot of lifters, and it doesn't isolate the traps nearly as well as other options. And lastly, we've got the straight arm pullover machine. It technically works the lats, but the resistance curve is backwards, loading the weakest part of the range and leaving the strongest part unloaded. For hypertrophy, that's the opposite of what you want. Now moving up to C tier. These are exercises that technically work, but either have poor carryover, awkward setup, or simply better alternatives. Think of the standard dumbbell row where you're bracing with one hand on a bench. Sure, it's a classic, but most lifters end up turning it into a shrugging motion that biases the traps instead of the lats. Without strict form, you lose tension where it matters most. Another C tier move is the machine alternatives. Think of the standard dumbbell row where you're bracing with one hand on a bench, high row. It's a cool hybrid between a row and pull down, but depending on the machine design, you often end up with a short range of motion and poor stretch in the lats. And then there's the reverse fly with tiny dumbbells. Yes, it trains the rear delts, but the resistance drops off where the delts are strongest. Unless you're using cables or a pec deck set up right, you're basically waving around pink weights and calling it training. B tier is where we start to get solid bread and butter movements that are fine, but not the best. Conventional deadlifts go here. They're incredible for strength and overall loading, but if we're being honest, they're a poor choice for hypertrophy in the back. The erectors dominate, and the lats only act as stabilizers. You can grow a massive back without ever pulling conventional from the floor. Barbell shrugs also land in B tier. Yes, they overload the upper traps, but they're a one-dimensional movement, and the short range of motion means they're not as efficient as something like a loaded carry. Then we have wide grip pull-ups. They're a staple, and they build an impressive V taper, but they tend to bias the upper back more than the lower lats, and are often limited by body weight strength instead of hypertrophy-specific loading. So B tier is good, but not optimal. Now let's get into the serious stuff with A tier. These are exercises that are legitimately fantastic for back hypertrophy and can be staples in almost any program. Take the chest-supported T-bar row. By removing momentum, you're locking the tension exactly where you want it, on the mid-traps, rhomboids, and lats. The range of motion is solid, the stability is high, and you can load it heavily. Next is the neutral grip pull-up or chin-up. Unlike the wide grip variation, the neutral grip puts your shoulder in a more natural position, lets you train through a longer range of motion, and hits both lats and biceps efficiently. Then we've got the cable face pull, which is fantastic for rear delts and traps. When done with proper external rotation at the top, it's one of the few movements that actually strengthens the often neglected rear delts in their shortened position. Finally, the seated cable row with a close grip deserves a spot here. It provides constant tension, is easy to progressively overload, and allows you to bias either lats or traps depending on elbow path. That brings us to the S tier, the exercises that, based on both biomechanics and EMG evidence, stand above the rest. And remember, only 4 moves make it here, 1 each for lats, mid traps, and rhomboids, rear delts, and upper traps. For lats, the clear S tier winner is the wide grip lat pull down, but with one important tweak, using a slight lean back and driving the elbows down instead of back. Multiple EMG studies show that the lat activation here is among the highest of any pull down variation. The lean back lets you keep tension in the lats across the full range, and the machine setup means you can push close to failure without worrying about technique breakdown. If your goal is to grow wide, sweeping lats, this is the gold standard. For the mid traps and rhomboids, the chest supported T-bar row earns S tier. While I ranked it A tier earlier, when we're forced to pick the single best option for this region, it takes the crown. The chest support locks you in, meaning less lower back fatigue, and you can drive your elbows back in a pure horizontal path, which is biomechanically ideal for the mid traps and rhomboids. The stability also means you can actually push those heavy, grinding sets of 8 to 12 reps without worrying about form collapse. For the rear delts, the cable rear delt fly is unmatched. Unlike dumbbells, the cable provides consistent tension through the entire movement, especially in the shortened position where the rear delts are strongest. EMG data consistently shows higher activation compared to dumbbells, and the setup is adjustable so anyone can find the right angle. If you want rear delts that actually pop from the side and round out your upper back, this is the exercise to rely on. Finally, for the upper traps, the S tier choice is the loaded carry, specifically the farmer's walk with heavy dumbbells or trap bar. Shrugs are fine, but loaded carries challenge the traps in a way that's more functional and sustainable. You get both isometric contraction to hold the weight and dynamic stability as you walk, leading to massive trap recruitment. Plus, you can load it with brutal weights and safely push close to failure without worrying about technique collapsing. So to recap the winners, wide grip lat pull down for the lats, chest supported T-bar row for the mid traps and rhomboids, cable rear delt fly for the rear delts, and heavy loaded carries for the traps. These are the exercises that consistently show up in both biomechanics analysis and EMG studies as top tier hypertrophy drivers. The takeaway here is simple. Don't just throw random back exercises into your program because they look hardcore or because you saw them on Instagram. Focus on movements that are stable, allow you to load hard and safely, train the target muscle through a long range of motion, and line up with your actual anatomy. That's the recipe for real growth. So if you want a wide, thick, three-dimensional back, you now know exactly which exercises deserve your attention and which ones deserve the trash bin.